Well, December is here, everyone. We have made it to the last month of 2020, and much like everything I procrastinate at, it comes back to bite me in the ass. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the movies and TV shows that I didn't get around to reviewing this year, mostly because I am a procrastinating nut, and also the fact that, quarantine has pretty much got me down most of the time, and most of us were indoors, and I just didn't really feel like doing much of anything this year. I think a lot of people were like that too. Yeah, here we go. Let's start with TV shows because there's not a lot of them and I wanted to cover them. Woke is, in my opinion, a pretty fine little comedy series about social justice and Black Lives Matter, as well as the creative barriers that people of color go through. Especially, it's really pointed out in the first episode with the marketing agents, that kind of lightened up his skin a bit, and that's not good. And again, I'm not necessarily the target audience for this show, but this is a show that tells a pretty good story about authorship and how art is essentially confined when people say that you shouldn't make your art political and all this other stuff. And I've seen that around a lot, that, you shouldn't make your art political and you shouldn't do this, otherwise you're going to lose money. And, the only way to appeal to the broadest demographic is to not put, politics in it. I don't necessarily agree with that statement. There can be a mix of good art as well as good messaging inside of it. The next show I watched was The Boys Season 2, specifically. I really enjoyed this season. In comparison to the previous season, it's not as good because, to me, I think the team dynamic works when they're the underdogs, but a lot of the time it's always like, there's a lot of conveniences in this season, but I really enjoyed the season nonetheless because the characters are still really fun to watch, and the actor who plays Homelander is even more sadistic this season. And it has a lot of commentary about social media and the way media is framed, and there's a lot of interesting stuff in this season. It's not as good as the first season, but I did find it really enjoyable. Cobra Kai is one of those shows that I was interested in when it was a YouTube original, but I never really got around to watching it. And then Netflix picked it up for a third season, and I'm like, okay, well, I might as well go check it out. I think Cobra Kai works as a continuation of the Karate Kid legacy, mostly because of how the show is framed. The show is framed as kind of a legacy show where we follow up with the person who is the antagonist of the first Karate Kid movie, Johnny. I think his name is Johnny. And there's just huge, development of his character that I just really bonded with. He's not a good guy. There's still some things that are not really great with him. But when you compare him to his sensei that comes into season 2, it's just... There's just night and day. The guy that was his sensei is just so evil in the best kind of ways. You can kind of sense what he's trying to do. And it's so effective, too. How he usurps Johnny's role as the leader of this dojo for kids. And it's just interesting to me. And I'm so excited to see what they do for season 3. Because that season 2 finale was crazy. It was just, what the hell just happened? So, yeah, season 3 coming up next year. I can't wait to talk about it more. The Owl House is one of those shows that I think is going to age a little bit well over time. This is from the same creators as Gravity Falls, but not necessarily the same team, even though Alex Hirsch has, some producer credit and was a voice in a couple of the episodes. But what I really love about Owl House is that this is a little bit more of a progressive version of Harry Potter than Harry Potter tried to be, mostly from what it tries to represent throughout the entirety of the show, how there is this nice relationship, between humans and elves and whatnot. There's this whole thing with, witches and magic and how it has to be controlled and all this other stuff, and, it's an interesting backstory that gets elaborated on throughout the entire first season. And I'm really excited for a second season, by the way, for this show. I think the animation's really spot on. I think the comedy is really funny. I think the characters that are introduced in this show is really cool, especially the Owl Lady of the Boiling Isles. I think she's just the funniest, like, magician witch I've ever seen. And then there's King. King's just adorable. I love him. And then Luz, I really like Luz too. She's a problem solver. She's really into her own thing. She's kind of a fangirl in a lot of ways, and I really, I really enjoy her style of magic and how it's very different than the other people, and it makes her special in a way. Like the fact that her style of magic is not necessarily practiced a lot. It's a special kind of magic that is rarely seen, and I really love that. I also love the way this season ends, too, with this really interesting cliffhanger, and I'm like, wow, what is this going to link into? So we'll have to wait and see. Season 2 is still being worked on, so I can't wait. Infinity Train is one of those shows that, to me, I think is a really good children's cartoon that is, like, really dark. I honestly think that this could be this generation's sort of, like, never-ending story meets, like... Courage the Cowardly Dog. I don't know. This show is just so interesting. Each and every book that came out for this show, I was just glued. I was actually glued when the first test pilot came out. That had that had like elements of the second episode of the first season where they go to the Corgi car. Each of these books is so unique because it follows a different perspective of the different characters and explores several different aspects of the train and expands upon it tenfold each and every time we step foot into the train. And the third book was picked up by HBO Max, and me and my brother watched it all the way through each and every time it uploaded a new set of episodes. And I was just blown away with this third season. Like, it had so much emotion. It had so many thought-provoking concepts about, the place of these characters that, the humans meet on this train. For a while, we thought that the main character of the entirety of the season was going to turn out to be secretly one of the actual characters on the train. Like, as part of the train, not as, like, a passenger. But, that was different. It was a crazy fan theory, but I really enjoyed this show's animation. Again, a lot of these animated shows I saw this year were really good. I really enjoyed the story. Like, every season I've seen of Infinity Train, it's always left an air of mystery about the train. And I feel like whenever we get to season 8, we're not going to get exactly the full picture of the meaning of this train, or whether or not we're going to get the full mechanics of the entirety of the train. Like, we get little bits and pieces, but why is it there? How was it made? What is the secret origin? I don't feel like we're going to get that, and I think that is okay with me. And third season, by the way, third season for HBO Max, it gets dark. Like, it gets dark towards the end. Like, kids die. That's just, like, that's no bones about it. Kids die in this season, and it's pretty sad. It's honestly sad, but it's really good. It's dark, sad, but good. I have no other words for it. High Score is this little tiny documentary series that I saw on Netflix that was pretty good. It was a sort of video game history style, like, documentary series that, kind of is a Cliff Notes version of the history of video gaming, especially from Atari all the way up through modern day. It even goes into things like LARPing and live action roleplay and all this other stuff mid-season. And I really loved the story. I liked some of the individual aspects, like competitive Sonic was a thing apparently, and I didn't even know about that. But yeah, I definitely check this one out on Netflix if you're into video game history or just video games in general like I am. Around Halloween, I decided to check out Over the Garden Wall, and I never watched it before then. And I think this is one of the best animated offerings of the past decade. Not only is this show really well done, it has brilliant atmosphere. The music is so well done by this band here. I can't really remember the name of them at the time. And I think the animation is just so iconic. It has this sense of autumny feel. Like, the colors are warm, sometimes muted. The story is heartbreaking at times, and it's a really fun little dark and depressing ghost story for kids that definitely will transcend through the generations, much like the Halloween tree. if anyone remembers that one. Lovecraft Country recently had its season finale, and to be honest, there are times in this show where I didn't really feel like some of the concepts were connecting, but a lot of the times I was really engaged into it. I know some people didn't necessarily find this show interesting because of the fact that each episode is just so wildly different, but I really enjoyed a lot of the vibes. There was one episode in particular that was kind of like a pulp adventure type of story, kind of like Goonies, but with some like noir aspects. It was the episode where they had to like go break into a museum. I'm not going to give you a full detail of like my individual thoughts on each episode, but Lovecraft Country definitely has its perks. I think the acting is really good. I think some of the writing elements are really interesting, especially in the context of different themes, social themes, about race and gender, and how we treat LGBT people. It's interesting, and I do find it interesting. It's not the most fleshed out of shows, I'd say, but it is an interesting show that has this really awesome air of adventure, of mystery, and you're just wondering what the next episode is going to be like, because it's so varied and different every time. And I really liked how the show's finale was kind of meta in a sense, but yeah, that's just my thoughts on Lovecraft Country. It's pretty good. Check it out. HBO Max or HBO or whatever. And then the last TV show I saw was Marvel 616, which is a documentary series on Disney Plus that chronicles some hidden mysteries and histories of Marvel as a whole, whether it be obscure TV shows from overseas like Japanese Spider-Man, which is the first episode, or even Paul Schrader talking about a group of animal cyborg eco-warriors called Brute Force, which I tweeted about, actually, on Twitter, and it got a response from Paul Schrader. Paul, if you're watching this, I want to be on board this project if it ever gets off the ground. I've definitely made it my life's goal now that I actually want to see cybernetic animal eco-warriors, the TV show, an animated TV show on Hulu or something like that. I would personally love to take on that project. It's just so crazy of a concept. But yeah, if you've ever wanted to learn about the different aspects, like artists who work on the comics, or cosplay, or the nature of cosplay, or even other sections like the female writers of Marvel, or there's just so many different episodes to choose from, and you don't really have to watch them in order. You could just kind of skip around to which ones you want to do. But I really enjoyed this documentary series. It was partly eye-opening as to the process of making the comics and the larger scope of the culture of Marvel comics in general. So yeah, definitely recommend this one too. Sorry, future Nick here. I forgot to add a couple more TV shows and movies, so we're going to start with a TV show here because we're at the end of the TV show segment. So let's talk about Animaniacs, the reboot on Hulu. To be fairly honest, I have almost little knowledge about the original Animaniacs. I've watched about 20-30 episodes of the original show, and I really did enjoy it. I liked all the different side segments like Pinky and the Brain and Goodfeathers. And then this show comes up in 2020, and to be honest, I actually really enjoyed it. I feel like the animation here is really crisp, and I really enjoyed the voice acting and the dialogue. All the jokes are pretty snappy this time around. But the only real complaint I have with the show is that it relies a little bit too much off of the nostalgia of Pinky and the Brain, as well as the Yakko, Wacko, and Dot segments, when in the original they were purposely segmented in different episodes to accommodate different sketches from all the different characters, and pretty much most of the characters that we had established in the previous incarnation of the show are almost absent in this show. It's kind of surprising that this show doesn't utilize a lot of the characters until one specific episode, but we're not going to talk about it here. But still, if there is going to be a season 2, which they're already greenlit for, I would love to see Goodfellas come back. I'd love to see a bunch of other different shows come back. I like the squirrel segments, which were pretty funny. I also like Mr. Bones. Please bring him back. And now that we have all the TV shows out of the way, let's talk about the movies that I saw over the pandemic that I never got to talk about. So let's start with SpongeBob Sponge on the Run. I had to watch this movie in various means that isn't necessarily legal, but me and my brother watched it, and I can say without a shadow of a doubt, it's not good. SpongeBob Sponge on the Run has so many issues that plague it, like the fact that there's like flashback scenes to when SpongeBob was at Camp Coral, and you just know that was like planned, that it was going to be an advertisement to a Paramount Plus TV show for CBS All Access that was going to be like, oh yeah, here's SpongeBob early days for your preschool kids and whatnot. And then this movie also has the problem of having like way too many celebrity cameos that, you know, think it's going to be funny because, hey look, here's Danny Trejo like disintegrating in thin air, here's Snoop Dogg, here's so many other different cameos, here's John Wick. It's funny, right? Because John Wick, kids know who John Wick is, right? You know, like these cameos just didn't make sense to me. And I think Karsten Runquist actually did a really good video on why the movie doesn't work, and I would suggest watching it. I'll put it in the description below. But yeah, there's my thoughts. I don't think it's good. It's probably one of the worst animated films of the year. Don't get me wrong. I think the animation's really cool. I like the art style, but the movie just doesn't work. To me anyway, it just doesn't work. Clouds is a story about a real life person who had this cancer that progressed into terminal cancer, and he made a hit song called Clouds. And I don't remember listening to this song ever when I was in high school at all. And apparently it was a big thing. So the song is catchy in of itself, and it has some of the same drama that you would find in like any style of cancer related stories and of how somber life is. And it definitely got me to tear up at one point. But it's not necessarily great. It has decent production value, at least. And there was one point where I thought Disney was going to be like, are they going to have sex? Is there going to be a sex scene in this movie? No, they didn't. And it was kind of... it was okay, I guess. But the movie is well shot, at least. It's decently directed. I think the acting is really good. I just didn't really care for it. At the end of the day, it's fine. It's pretty fine. It's better than a lot of the other Disney Plus movies that were released this year. But, yeah, I mean, there's my thoughts on that. Dick Johnson is Dead. A somewhat similar story to Clouds, but a little bit more funny. Dick Johnson is Dead is one of those movies that I think is just morbidly funny. Dick Johnson is the father of the filmmaker of this movie that decides to make a movie with her father, who's having these issues with his brain over time, and she decides to make a film about her dad and recreate certain scenes, and even at one point creating his own funeral scene, which is so funny to see him react to how others would react to his death. It's also kind of sad at the same time, and it has this nice balance of melancholy and joy. And I just really appreciated this movie. It's really funny. It makes you really think about how short life is and how we need to take time to appreciate the things that we love the most in this life, because so much of this movie reminds me of that concept. So let's talk about Artemis Fowl. Artemis Fowl was bad. Everyone's talked about it. It's bad. The changes they made from the original book either made no sense, or the changes were so drastic that it cut down characters' intrigue from the original book. It even gets the main character wrong a lot. The main character in the original book was supposed to be an asshole. He was actually like a dick who was a criminal. He was the main character, yes, and you can make a likable character out of being like an actual bad guy, but apparently Disney was like, nah, fuck that shit. We're gonna make a semi-relatable guy who has daddy issues and all this other stuff, and it just doesn't work, man. Like, this movie was bad. I can see why they put it on Disney Plus, even if the pandemic wasn't a factor. They probably would have still moved it to Disney Plus because they didn't see dollar signs with it, especially after the fact that A Wrinkle in Time was a thing and it didn't make money at all. So I can understand why they put it on Disney Plus, but it's also still really bad. I mean, some of the effects are kind of fun, but it's just, I don't know. Even the action's terrible in this movie. I got bored like 15 minutes into the movie, and I just kept being bored the entire time. Just bad. And speaking of Disney Plus, Mulan 2020. This movie's garnered a lot of controversy. I even wrote about it in my Letterboxd review, and it's pretty bad. This movie is so... It's trying to be something else, but the biggest problem, again, with all these live-action remakes is that it tries to have so much nostalgia for the original that some of the nostalgia stuff they have for it that they translate into live-action just doesn't work. There's like a character named Cricket that just doesn't make sense to me. There's the fact that they use the instrumental music for the original Mulan into this movie, and the effect of that music just doesn't translate well. The film is trying to go for action, and honestly, I would have loved a Pirates of the Caribbean style action film that, you know, did Mulan really justice, but there are other Mulan movies out there that do the character justice, that have action that's really satisfying, and this movie just doesn't have any of that. And it goes for this whole thing that Chi is like the Force, and God, that's insulting and like just terrible at the same time. Like, the Chi itself is not like a gendered thing, and they made it a gendered thing, and it's just, God, it's so bad. And we're not even going to step on the whole controversy with the fact that, you know, Disney shot in an area where Uyghurs were in concentration camps or re-education camps. Even a stone throws away from that when filming this show. It's bad. This movie's just bad. I was bored by the whole thing. I at one point was just starting to mock the damn thing because it was just so bad. Is it as bad as The Lion King 2020? Hell no. It is not as bad as that. But it's so bland and boring and forgettable. It's not my cup of tea. I know there's definitely fans of it, but God, Jesus Christ. And then let's move over to Bill and Ted Face the Music. I think this is one of the best films of the year, unironically, mostly because of how bad 2020 has been throughout the entirety of the year. We needed this movie in our lives. It is funny, it's heartwarming, it has a story that definitely resonates well with me personally. I just really love the kinetic energy of this movie. I really enjoyed the humor of the movie. It's definitely not as good as the first two movies, but it's pretty good. I found it pretty enjoyable. I find the song the Weezer made, The End is Near, I find that song pretty fun to listen to unironically. But yeah, Bill and Ted Face the Music was a really fun time. I'd recommend it. It's not great. It's not best in the year material, but it's really fun, and I highly recommend it. Babysitter Killer Queen. I enjoyed the first Babysitter movie, even though that movie was kind of cringe itself. But here, this time, it's just not good. I have no other words really to say. It's not a good movie. It's not even a fun horror movie. It tries to make like jokes about it being a sequel, and they refer to Terminator 2 a lot, and that doesn't make sense for me. To me, anyway, it just doesn't make sense to compare it to Terminator when the first one was blatantly like just a horror film, had nothing to do with Terminator. I just didn't get it. A lot of the jokes were just so bad, and even the ending is just so weird. Like, it just comes off as so out of left field and kind of retroactively changes the character motivation of one of the characters from the previous movie, and it's just like, why do that? I mean, I guess you're trying to give this character some redemption, but it just comes off as just like so out of left field. I'm like, wow, no build up at all to any of this. I mean, it's just, what the hell? The Five Bloods is honestly one of my favorite films of the year. I think this is a film that will be memorable, especially to Chadwick Boseman fans. Rest in peace. This is a really fun-ish movie. It's also a movie that kind of reminded me of Without a Paddle in some ways. Like, these guys go on a trip to Vietnam to get some treasure that they buried back then, all the way back in the Vietnam War, and it definitely tackles some political issues, but not necessarily as deep or deep cutting as BlacKkKlansman. But I'd say Da 5 Bloods is still enjoyable to watch. It has really great performances, in my opinion, from most of the actors in this film, especially the lead actor of the film, who just gives this really awesome, powerful performance towards the end. I just enjoyed the damn movie. Definitely check it out. I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Charlie Kaufman isn't necessarily my favorite Charlie Kaufman film, but in comparison to his other films like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind or even Synecdoche, New York, it definitely has a darker, more cynical edge to it. This is a movie that is so psychologically horrifying that it's very existential. It's a film that's pretty much about the processes of death and how we process death ourselves. And this film has so many other different interpretations, so my interpretation is not necessarily going to be the one that you have when you watch it, but it is a film that has so many different themes that to even describe all the different themes, it's going to take a while. Not as long as, like, Synecdoche, New York, but, like, this is a film that has so much going on. I think the acting is really good, especially by Heather Buckley, who is a really talented actress. I'm glad that she's getting more roles, especially after Wild Rose. I really enjoyed her in that. But this movie in particular, I think she does a really terrific job. Also, the same can be said about the other actors in this movie. I like the details that this movie has in the backgrounds, as well as the different makeup portions that they have in the movie. There's just so much going on here that to even go into detail will just take up the entirety of the rest of this video, so we're not going to go into that. But yeah, definitely check it out if you're a Charlie Kaufman fan like I am. If not, I don't know what to tell you. Watch Queen's Gambit. Hubie Halloween is Adam Sandler's return to a more Happy Madison-esque style comedy, and this was kind of sad to see, mostly because of his performance in Uncut Gems was so good. Such a damn shame that movie wasn't nominated, but Uncut Gems was just so good. And then when you get to this movie, it's just so much back to normal, and to be honest, I think this movie is okay. It's definitely not as bad as, like, Jack and Jill, or even, like, the Grown Ups movies, but this is definitely a return to the whole, like, 90s shtick that he had, where he played, like, characters like Waterboy or Billy Madsen. I'm a dumbass. That's the name of the company. Happy Madison is the company. Billy Madsen is the character. Whatever. He's back to doing those characters in this movie, and I think it's kind of enjoyable, with a message about not bullying others that is just good enough for, like, kids to watch too. It's definitely a fun but disposable little film, and I'd say it's pretty good to watch on Halloween if you're looking for something to watch with the family and not go out. So there's my opinion on Hubie Halloween. Hi again, Future Nick here. I did not get around to record this one. I had it actually on my list, but somehow my mind just kind of skips over this one. So it's Borat 2, the subsequent movie film. I remember watching the original film in college, and I pretty much laughed my ass off. Sacha Baron Cohen has this way of getting under people's skin to the point where they don't really know if he's bluffing or not. It just feels so natural for him to go undercover as the different characters in this film, and I really enjoyed it. But there is definitely a difference between the two. The first film was more of a documentary, like a mockumentary of sorts, and we follow Sacha doing this impression of a stereotyped character who's a news reporter, and he's just reporting the news from America in the original film. And in this one, it's much more of a story, and there's this through line with his daughter that's pretty interesting, I guess, and comments on the current political landscape. And this is definitely a film that we needed in 2020, where Sacha Baron Cohen just kind of goes cross-country during the pandemic. And this film definitely had its struggles up and down. Like, Sacha Baron Cohen explains how he at one point had to wear a bulletproof vest because he was scared of the armed Trump supporters, which I'm not going to get into my personal politics on that one, but to be honest, that's in of itself is scary enough.
Drive. Go.
That was harrowing.
Yeah.
Does that happen to you frequently, or is that a fairly rare occurrence?
It's fairly rare. I mean, it happens occasionally. I mean, this was the first movie where I've had to wear a bulletproof vest.
But anyway, if you like the first movie, you're probably going to enjoy yourself with this one. It's definitely not as good as the original film, but it does have a lot of the same awesomeness that the original had in terms of its comedy and its satire and its gross out humor. It's pretty fun. Shithouse was a movie that was actually recommended to me by a friend of mine from college, and I'd never heard about this movie until now. But Shithouse is an amazing movie, but I think this movie really captures the essence of what a first-year college student goes through, the uneasiness about stepping into a new world, the uneasiness about meeting new people, and how confusing and the whole communication can be between people. I think this movie is... I think Shithouse will definitely appeal to modern day college students, even ones like older probably, but more especially this is geared towards the modern day college students, the Generation Z sort of side of things, and I really did enjoy this movie. Everything just feels so natural about this movie, even when the actors are like, you know, obviously kind of nervous on screen. It just feels natural to me. All of it does. I think the performances are well done. I think cinematography-wise, it looks pretty good, even if... No. I think cinematography-wise, it's pretty good. Direction's really decent. I think the writing is pretty good. It's definitely one of my favorites of the year. It's not a great film, but it's one of my favorites of the year. So yeah, definitely check out Shithouse if you haven't. It's on digital So check out Shithouse if you haven't yet. It's pretty good. Pretty good stuff. Next up, I saw a documentary called Boys State, and Boys State is okay, I guess. It follows a bunch of students in Texas who go to this like camp for like politics and whatnot, and they divide into two different parties, and they try to like compete against each other to try to win the student governorship. And it's pretty interesting. It's interesting to find out that so many different presidents and political leaders in America went to this boys' state sort of thing, and it's just interesting. I think it's an interesting documentary, especially for those who are looking to get into politics, I guess, and how the different systems kind of work together from a student perspective. But it's not necessarily the most well done documentary. I think it's shot nice. I think the interviews are nice, but overall, I didn't find it too impressive. Yeah, that's just my opinion of it. It's interesting. I'll give it that. Over the Moon is a movie that everyone has been talking about on the internet, and for good reason. It's I believe it's a Chinese animated film, but it's directed by one of the former Disney animators from Disney, who I think he did Treasure Planet. I'm not sure. I think the animation in this movie is pretty good. I think the voice acting is pretty decent and solid. I think the story is there too at times, but to me, it's not like the best thing in the world. I just found the story that just kind of floats around a lot. And what I mean by that is that it just kind of goes from one point to the other with no real, like, effort to get from one point to the other. It just doesn't really feel like there's a lot of conflict until the very, very end. And it's just like, I mean, it's fine. It's well directed. I think the culture is pretty decently represented. I mean, this is coming from me, a white guy, so I'm not sure how other viewers actually view this movie, but I think it's pretty fine. I think the movie is solid. Again, well animated. It's well voice acted. I think the story is fine. Just not my cup of tea. It's just fine. And these last two movies that I'm going to be talking about are movies I've seen months ago, back in August, but I didn't bother doing a review for these movies until they were out. Mostly because I did not want people to go to cinemas to see them at all. Mostly because of the insane, like, behavior from the studios, just being like, oh yeah, we're gonna toss these movies in the theaters. And of course, these last two movies were Tenet and The New Mutants. Let's start with The New Mutants real quick. I think this movie is kind of bad. It's not terrible. I don't think it's like the worst thing ever. It's definitely not as bad as X-Men Origins Wolverine or X-Men Apocalypse. But for the finale of this whole experiment of the Fox X-Men movies, this is definitely one that kind of whimpers off, but not as bad as Dark Phoenix, I guess. But what I really enjoyed most about New Mutants is how it kind of reminded me a little bit of Nightmare on Elm Street 3, the Dream Warriors. Like, it's pretty much a similar setup. You get a bunch of teens together that have screwed up backstories and different powers and stuff. Only the powers are not within dreams, but they actually have powers, and I like that aspect. And if they really went all in on that aspect, I think it probably would have been more interesting. But the movie definitely has some character flaws, and I think it honestly would have stood to have some more content added to it. It feels like there was just so much cut out of it that, to be honest, I would actually enjoy an extended cut. And apparently I've heard there's like some deleted scenes that add a little bit more context here and there, but I don't know, man. This movie had potential to be a brand new trilogy or a brand new franchise, but it kind of got botched. And maybe it needed some reshoots, maybe some rewrites in the script. There's definitely some things that probably could have been added or subtracted to make it better. I think Nando V Movies does a pretty decent job at making a good argument as to what needed to be changed about the movie in order to make it a little bit more streamlined, to make it more cohesive a little bit. Because there's just so much going on in this movie, and there's so many different antagonists in this movie that I did feel it got bloated towards the end. But there's definitely some decent stuff about it. I think some of the acting was fine. I think the Demon Bear concept was interesting, but definitely different from the original comic of the same name, the Demon Bear Saga. But yeah, I mean, it's fine. It's fine, but it's definitely not great. I have waited to talk about this movie, and I have some thoughts on it that I kind of want to elaborate a little bit on in a separate video, especially the release of this movie and how some studios have responded to it by doing different things in response to the film's failure in terms of its box office. But to be honest, I think Tenet is a pretty enjoyable popcorn movie. It has all the necessary fixings of like a Christopher Nolan blockbuster expansive movie. It has really fun concepts about time manipulation, even if some of the concepts don't necessarily work all the time. I think some of the effects and choreography really work to its benefit. They purposely staged some of the choreography to be kind of like how it would be in reverse. And a lot of the times I was also reminded of the Red Dwarf episode where they go into a world where everything is walking backwards. And it's just funny, to be honest, at times. But yeah, this movie definitely has its issues. I think the villain's pretty one-dimensional. Not that I don't think that his motivations are bad. I just didn't really find any attachment to the villain, and it's just kind of one note. I think John David Washington does a great job as the protagonist. Okay, that's just one of the things I didn't necessarily like about the movie, is that it's so... At times I feel like that's on purpose. Like the whole fact that his alias is the protagonist is like, to me, it's just, I feel like at times it feels like it's supposed to be like a meta play on like action movies. I just don't know. But this movie definitely has some concepts that would be interesting to follow up in a sequel. Like the whole ending scene, which I'm not going to spoil here. But I feel like that ending scene would be nice to like follow into a next movie. Like we start with that scene and it follows Robert Pattinson's direction and goes, or maybe like I don't know how he would like do a sequel to this movie, but I love the way this movie has these crisscrossing sections, and it was a little satisfying to me when I saw and realized, wow, okay, so that's where that intersects and that's where that intersects. And that's pretty interesting, and I love how time just works in this movie. I'm just a big sucker for mechanics, even if sometimes it doesn't work. But yeah, I think Tenet's okay. I think it's well worth your time when it comes out on 4K eventually this month. I know it comes out in December, so I'll probably be picking it up at some point. And there you have it. My rundown of the films and TV shows that I watched while I was procrastinating throughout the pandemic. I'm sorry I never got to talk about each of these things individually. I probably would have done so if I just wasn't preoccupied by other things. And yeah, I hope you guys can forgive me on that one. But yeah, this month is definitely going to be interesting for movies. We're getting like Mank in a couple weeks, or this week actually, right? This week, next week, I don't know, whatever. And then we're getting Wonder Woman 1984 on HBO Max on Christmas and Soul on Disney Plus on Christmas. So definitely there's going to be some stuff that we're talking about this year, for towards the end of the year, before I make my final best and worst list for January. So that's going to be fun. And also I am working on a special Christmas project that I'm keeping under wraps. Again, I'm not going to tell you what it is, but it's definitely important to me in my childhood, and yeah, can't wait to share details about that later, and I can't wait to see all those other movies. So take care, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.